Welcome back to PsyberSpace, the podcast where we dive deep into psychology, culture, media, and technology. I'm your host, Leslie Poston, a marketing executive and research psychologist whose research touches on issues of power dynamics, resistance, adaptation, identity, and the evolution of communication in the digital age. Today, we're tackling a topic that's got everyone from CEOs to interns buzzing: change management. Now, I know what you're thinking. Change management sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry, but stick with me. Understanding how to manage change is a critical skill in an uncertain world. Think about it. How many times have you seen a fancy new initiative roll out at work only to fizzle out faster than New Year's resolution? That's where change management comes in. It's not just about fancy PowerPoints and new org charts. It's about understanding how our brains respond when faced with change. Whether you're a leader trying to steer your team through choppy waters, or an employee wondering why the heck your company is shaking things up again, this episode's for you. We'll explore why some changes stick, while others fall flat, and how understanding the quirks of the human mind can make all the difference. Let's start by talking about what change management actually is. We're going to focus on the work angle, but change management is vital to politics, public health, and so much more as well. In the context of work, it's essentially about getting people from point A to point B in an organization and making sure they don't jump ship along the way. Now, you'd think this would be straightforward, right? Just tell people what to do and they'll do it. Well, if you've ever tried to get a toddler to eat their vegetables, you know it's not that simple. According to Cotter International, about 70% of change initiatives fail. That's right. More than 2/3 of the time, all that planning and fancy talk amounts to a big fat nothing. And you know what the main reason is? It's not bad planning or lack of resources, it's good old-fashioned human resistance. Think about the last time your company tried to change something. Maybe it was a new software system or a restructuring. How did you feel? If you're like most people, you probably felt a mix of anxiety, skepticism, and maybe a touch of here we go again. That's your brain trying to protect you from the unknown. Our brains are wired to be cautious about change. Back in our caveman days, change often meant danger, like a new predator moving into the neighborhood. So we developed this tendency to stick with what we know. It's like that old saying, better the devil you know than the devil you don't. But here's the kicker. In today's world, not changing is often riskier than changing. Just ask Blockbuster how well sticking to their old model worked out for them. So, successful change management is about more than just having a good plan. It's about understanding the psychological barriers and finding ways to overcome them. It's about making people feel safe and excited about the change rather than threatened by it. We'll talk about how different leadership styles can make or break a change initiative, but before we do, I want you to think about a time when you've been part of a successful change at work. What made it work? Was it clear communication, a sense of involvement, or maybe just a really compelling reason for the change? Let's talk about the elephant in the room, leadership. We often think of leaders as these all-powerful figures who can shape their organizations at will, but the truth is, even the most charismatic leaders fumble the ball when it comes to change management, and often it's because they're using the wrong playbook. Two common leadership styles can be real change killers: pace setting and coercive leadership. Pace-setting leaders are the do-as-I-do now types. They set incredibly high standards and expect everyone to keep up with them. It's like having a fitness instructor who runs marathons before breakfast and who expects you to keep pace. Sure, it might work for a short sprint, but in the long run, you're looking at burnout. Then we've got coercive leaders. These are the my way or the highway folks, command and control. They demand immediate compliance and aren't shy about using threats to get their way. It's like being back in high school with that teacher who ruled by fear. Sure, you might do what they say, but you're not exactly feeling inspired, are you? Both of these leadership styles have one thing in common. They absolutely demolish psychological safety. We talked about the importance of psychological safety a few episodes back. If you missed it, psychological safety is about creating an environment where people feel safe to speak up, to ask questions, and even to make mistakes. The concept comes from Amy Edmondson, a professor at Harvard Business School. She found that teams with high psychological safety were more innovative, more engaged, and better at navigating change, as well as more productive. But under pace setting and coercive leadership, psychological safety goes out the window faster than you can say quarterly review. Think about it. If you're afraid of being yelled at for asking a stupid question, are you going to speak up when you notice a flaw in a new process? Probably not. You're more likely to keep your head down and hope someone else deals with it. Maybe you're thinking, sometimes you need to be tough to get things done, and you're not entirely wrong. Daniel Goleman, who focused on emotional intelligence, found that these commanding styles can work in a crisis. If the building's on fire, you do want someone capable of shouting clear orders, not asking for a consensus. But here's the thing. Change isn't a short-term crisis. It's a process. And for that process, you need leaders who can create an environment of trust, open communication, and yes, psychological safety. So what does that kind of leadership look like? Well, it might be democratic, involving team members in decisions, or affiliative, focusing on creating harmony and emotional bonds. Maybe it's a coaching style, developing people for the future. Or it could be visionary, painting a compelling picture of where you're all headed together. The key is these styles make people feel valued, heard, and supported. And let me tell you, when people feel that way on your team, they are so much more likely to jump on board with change rather than clinging to the status quo for dear life. It's all well and good to manage change as a leader, but what if you're trying to manage change and you're not the boss? You know, that special kind of headache that comes with a matrix organization or cross-functional projects. Picture this. You're tasked with rolling out a new customer service system. Sounds straightforward, right? Except you need buy-in from IT, training from HR, budget approval from finance, and cooperation from the actual customer service team. And did I mention you're not the direct manager for any of these groups? In situations like these, you can't rely on formal authority. You have to become a master of influence. It's less about cracking the whip and more about being a really good party host. You're bringing people together, making introductions, making sure everyone's having a good time while subtly steering the conversation where you need it to go. Henry Mintzberg has done great work about power dynamics in organizations. He talks about different sources of power, things like formal authority, sure, but also control of resources, technical skills, and access to information. When you're working across teams, you have to tap into all of these. So how do you do it? Well, first you have to build coalitions. Find the influencers in each team. You know, those people everyone listens to, whether they've got a fancy title or not. Get them on board with your change initiative. If they're excited about it, chances are their teammates will follow suit. Next, become a boundary spanner. That's a fancy way of saying be the bridge. You have to understand the needs, concerns, and language of each team, and then translate between them. IT might be worried about system security, while customer service is focused on ease of use. Your job? To find the common ground and show how the change addresses everyone's concerns. Here's another tip. Leverage those informal networks. Every office has a grapevine, right? Those channels where the real news travels. Tap into those. Not in a manipulative way, mind you, but just to spread information and to gather feedback. Sometimes a casual chat by the coffee machine or sticking around after everyone else leaves the Zoom can be more effective than a dozen formal meetings. Speaking of meetings, when you do have them, make them count. Use data to make your case, but don't forget the power of stories. Some people are convinced by hard numbers, but others by compelling narratives, so use both. Talk about the customer who will be helped, the time that will be saved, and the frustrations that will be eliminated. But perhaps most importantly, practice empathetic leadership. Really try to understand where each team is coming from. What are their fears about this change? What's in it for them? Address those specific needs in your change strategy. And remember, when you're working across teams, you're not just managing a change in processes or systems, you're navigating a complex web of relationships, motivations, and emotions. It's not about imposing your will, it's about creating a shared vision that everyone wants to be part of. That takes patience, flexibility, and communication. Let's talk about how to create an environment where everyone feels like they're part of the change process, not just subjects of it. How do we get there? First, we need to understand why collaboration is so critical during change. It's not just about making people feel good, although that's a nice bonus. When people feel they've contributed to the change, they're more likely to support it. It's like the IKEA effect, studied by Norton, Moken, and Ariely, the psychological effect where that wobbly bookshelf you built yourself somehow becomes your favorite piece of furniture because you were part of making it. Collaboration also taps into the collective intelligence of your organization. No matter how smart you are as an individual, you don't have all the answers. The folks on the front lines often have better insights that the managers in the corner offices might miss. How do we foster this kind of collaboration? One way is to create cross-functional teams. Bring people together from different departments to work on specific aspects of the change. It's like creating a mini Avengers team for your change initiative. You've got the technical know-how of Iron Man, the people skills of Black Widow, the strategic thinking of Captain America. You get the idea. If you listened to our episode on why meetings suck a while back, then you'll understand that the way you structure this collaboration is essential. Happily, collaboration doesn't have to mean endless meetings in stuffy conference rooms. In fact, some of the best collaboration happens in more informal settings. Take Google, for example. They once were famous for a 20% time policy, where employees spent one day a week working on side projects. This led to some of their most innovative products like Gmail and Google News. It was all about creating spaces where people can come together, share ideas, and work on solutions. Creating safe collaborative spaces is something you can do remotely or in person. Another key aspect of collaboration is creating feedback loops. You want to make sure you're not just broadcasting information about the change, but actually listening to what people have to say about it. This can be through surveys, focus groups, or even just regular check-ins. And here's a pro tip. When you get feedback, act on it. Nothing kills collaboration faster than feeling like your input is going into a black hole. Even if you can't implement every suggestion, acknowledge them. Let people know their voices are being heard. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, conflict. When you bring these diverse groups together, there's bound to be friction. But here's the thing, conflict is not necessarily bad. In fact, if managed well, it can lead to better solutions. The key is to create an environment where people feel safe expressing different viewpoints. Remember that psychological safety we talked about earlier? This is where it really comes into play. You want people to feel comfortable challenging ideas, including your own. One way to do this is to explicitly encourage dissenting opinions. It might feel a bit uncomfortable at first, especially for the men on your team. Why? Because, as Baron Glick found, men are more likely than women to engage in what we call challenging behavior, like looking for flaws in arguments, saying an automatic no without hearing an idea, or playing devil's advocate. Unlearning that behavior might take some coaching. While generations are getting a bit better at working together and overcoming the assumptions of stereotypes, cross-generational change management can still feel a bit like herding cats. But don't worry, with the right approach, you can get everyone moving in the same direction. Let's quickly review some generational trends, and note that I say trends here because no generation is a monolith. Baby boomers often value stability and face-to-face communication. They've seen a lot of change across their careers, and that can make them either adaptable or resistant, depending on their experiences. Gen X are often described as the latchkey kids and are fiercely independent but adaptable. They remember life before the internet, while the internet was being built, and they've also embraced the technology now. Millennials are the digital pioneers. They came of age as the internet was really taking off, so they often seek purpose in their work and value flexibility. And then we have Gen Z. These digital natives are used to rapid change and can get frustrated with slow-moving processes. They value authenticity and social responsibility. But here's the million-dollar question. How do you manage change across all these different age groups? Well, it's about flexing your communication style and understanding different motivations. For example, when you're communicating about change, you might need to use a mix of channels. Town hall meetings aren't enough alone anymore. You also need to leverage email, Slack, video, and even audio, like do an internal podcast. It's not just about the medium, it's about the message itself as well. When you're explaining the why behind a change, you might emphasize stability and experience, efficiency, purpose and growth, and innovation and social impact to cover everyone's motivations and concerns. Here's another strategy. Create mixed generation teams. This isn't just about managing change, it's also about leveraging the strengths of each age group. Pull together the institutional knowledge of the boomers, the pragmatism of Gen X, the tech savviness of millennials, and the fresh perspectives of Gen Z for better growth. You could even try reverse mentoring. This is where you would have a younger employee share their skills and perspective with an older one. It's particularly effective for technology-related changes, but it does have to be approached the right way. It also has the nice side effect of breaking down generational barriers and fostering mutual respect. Remember, the goal is not to put people in generational boxes. It's to recognize that people of different ages might have different needs and preferences when it comes to change, and adjust your tactics and your message accordingly to focus on individuals and not just broad generational labels. The generations here are a guide, not a rule book. And remember, at the end of the day, we're all human. Regardless of when we were born, we all want to feel valued, heard, and supported during times of change. If you can provide that, you're well on your way to successful cross-generational change management. What about folks who are resistant to change? You know the type I'm talking about, the folks who respond to every new initiative with, "But we've always done it this way," or the eye rollers in the back of the room during meetings, the passive-aggressive emailers who find a problem for every solution. First things first, let's not demonize these folks. Resistance to change is as natural as breathing. Remember what we said at the beginning of the episode. Our brains are wired to be cautious about change. It's not personal. It's just human nature. And in fact, resistance is not always a bad thing. Resistance can highlight legitimate concerns and lead to improvements in your change process. The key is to manage it effectively. Let's break down some strategies for overcoming resistance. First, create a sense of urgency. Help people understand why the change is necessary and why now. This taps into our natural aversion to loss. If people believe that not changing is riskier than changing, they're more likely to get on board. Next, involve your employees and your teammates in the change process. Remember that IKEA effect we talked about earlier. That applies here too. When people feel they have a say in the changes affecting them, they're more likely to support those changes. It addresses our psychological need for control. Communication is key. And I'm not just talking about sending out an email announcement. I'm talking about clear, consistent, two-way communication. Uncertainty breeds anxiety, so the more information you can provide, the better. And make sure you're not just broadcasting. Create channels for feedback and questions. Don't forget to create quick wins. Early successes, even small ones, can build momentum and motivation. It's like giving your brain a little dopamine hit. And, it says, oh, this change thing isn't so bad after all. And don't forget to address the what's in it for me, folks. Help individuals understand how the change will benefit them personally. Certainly, we want people to care about our organizations as a whole, but let's be real, everyone can be a little selfish. Tap into that. Provide ample support and resources. Ensure people have the tools and training they need to succeed in the new environment. This builds confidence and reduces anxiety. It's like giving people a life jacket before asking them to jump into the deep end. And perhaps most importantly, acknowledge and validate their concerns. Simply feeling heard can reduce resistance. It taps into our need for empathy and understanding. You don't always have to agree, but you do need to listen. Remember, overcoming resistance isn't about steamrolling the opposition. It's about understanding concerns, addressing them honestly, and bringing people along the road to change. It's not always easy, but when it works, it's incredibly rewarding. There's one more critical aspect of change management that we should discuss: the ethical considerations. Because let's face it, with great power comes great responsibility. And when you're managing change, you've got the power to impact people's lives in significant ways. You see, when we're caught up in the excitement of a new initiative or the pressure to transform an organization, it's easy to forget that our decisions have real impacts on real people. And I'm not just talking about the bottom line or productivity metrics. I'm talking about people's lives, their stress levels, their job satisfaction, or even their ability to do their jobs effectively. Think about it this way. Imagine you're rolling out a new digital system that's going to streamline operations and increase efficiency. Sounds great on paper, right? But what if that system makes it harder for your older employees to do their jobs? Or what if it inadvertently disadvantages your remote workers? Suddenly, your well-intentioned change has become an ethical minefield. So how do we navigate this? Transparency is key. Be honest about the reasons for the change and its potential impacts, both positive and negative. It's tempting to sugarcoat things, to only focus on the upside, but people can smell spin a mile away, and nothing erodes trust faster than feeling like you're being sold a bill of goods by your manager. We also need to ensure that the burdens and benefits of change are distributed equally across the organization. And no, I do not mean that everyone should suffer equally. I mean that we need to be mindful of how changes impact different groups and individuals. This brings us to our next point, respect for individuals. Change shouldn't compromise people's dignity or core values. This might seem obvious, but in the rush to implement change, it's easy to forget the human element. Remember, we're dealing with people, not chess pieces. And let's talk about accessibility. This is a big one. We need to ensure that our changes don't disproportionately impact any group, especially those in vulnerable positions or with less access to resources. Who might those groups be? Well, think about employees with disabilities or remote workers, non-native language speakers, employees with caregiving responsibilities for parents or children, those with limited access to technology, those from disenfranchised groups. The list goes on. How do we address these concerns? Well, you could first conduct impact assessments, and before implementing changes, take the time to really think through how they might impact different groups within your organization. Next, provide accommodations. Ensure that all employees have the tools and support they need to adapt to the change. This might mean offering different training formats, providing assistive technologies, or simply allowing more time for some groups to adapt. Here's another important one. Seek diverse input. Include a wide range of voices in your change planning process. Let's face it, if your change management team all looks the same and comes from the same background, you are likely missing some important perspectives. And don't forget to monitor ongoing impacts. Regularly check in on how changes are affecting different groups and be prepared to make adjustments. Change management is not a set it and forget it kind of deal. Now, I know some of you might be thinking, Leslie, this all sounds great, but it also sounds like a lot of work. Do I really need to do all of this? And the answer is absolutely yes, not just because it's the right thing to do, although it is, but because it makes good business sense. You see, when we prioritize ethics and accessibility in our change management, we build trust. And trust, my friends, is the secret sauce not just of successful change, but of successful business. The Project Management Institute has emphasized this in their change management framework. When people trust that you have their best interest at heart, they're much more likely to get on board with your changes. Plus, by considering all these different perspectives and needs, you're likely to end up with a more robust, flexible change initiative, one that can stand up to real-world complexities and challenges. As we wrap up our deep dive into the psychology of change management, I want you to consider this thought. Change isn't just about processes or technologies or org charts. At its heart, change management is about people. It's about understanding how our brains work, how we interact with each other, and how we can create environments where everyone can thrive, even in the midst of transformation. Whether you're a leader steering your organization through choppy waters, or an employee trying to navigate the currents of change, remember, change is a road we're all on together, and with a little understanding, a lot of communication, and a healthy dose of empathy, it's something we can not only survive, but enjoy. Before I sign off today, a bit of housekeeping. Today and tomorrow are the last day to vote for the podcast. There will be a link in the show notes. I am still so pleased PsyberSpace got nominated for Best Psychology Podcast, and I can't thank you all enough for letting me know you're enjoying the show with a nomination. Thanks for listening to this episode of PsyberSpace. I'm your host, Leslie Poston, signing off. Until next time, keep riding the waves of change and stay curious.